Hi everyone, thank you for joining us this almost afternoon. We'll be getting started in a few minutes, just doing a sound check for those that are online at the moment. You can ask questions in the Q&A section and we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. This webinar has been recorded and we'll send that out to you in the next few days. So we'll just hold tight for another few minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you. Hey everyone, just doing a sound check for those that have joined us in the last minute or so. We will be getting started in a couple of minutes, just doing a sound check to make sure that you can hear. There is a Q&A section on your screen where you can pop your questions in and we will do a session at the end answering those questions. If you see a question you like, you can like it and we will go off the top voted questions. And the webinar has been recorded and we'll send that out to you in the next few days. So we'll just give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Yana Averyanova and I'm the chair of the Special Interest Group of Immigrant Engineers. Just a bit of information about our group. So our group is a small community of about 300 members and we are part of Engineering New Zealand. We call ourselves as SIGI, and what purpose of our group is to provide support to engineers who recently come to New Zealand or who are already in New Zealand and provide support in settling in New Zealand and find your first job. We are not recruiters. We just provide support with CV writing and checking it and providing the feedback. We also help with the interviewing and also provide the support to overcome the barriers that you may have when you try to settle in New Zealand. If it sounds interesting to you, you can Google SIGI, which is sigie.org.nz in the internet, and you can find online form there. Our membership is free, so if you'd like to join us, you're welcome. Today we are presenting, today's webinar is the joint event, SIGI and Electrical Engineering Group. And our presenter is Daniel Miller, who is a committee member of Engineering New Zealand. Daniel is a director and a principal electrical engineer at Jubilee. Daniel is a chartered engineer and a current committee member of New Zealand Society for Safety Engineering and Engineering New Zealand Electrical Engineering Group. Daniel also a registered electrical engineer with Electrical Works Registration Board. Daniel got more than 40 years experience in electrical engineering industry, working with a wide variety of projects in industry. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to Daniel.
Hi everyone. I will present today's work as a mind map, and I just want to say that my journey started in South Africa. I came to New Zealand in 2007, and I have had some experience in the military before more industrial work since 1996. The conditions changed like it did for many of the immigrant engineers in New Zealand in their own countries. And we, like myself, look for opportunities in countries where your input can be contributing to the good of the country and all its people. My opportunity in New Zealand started with a consultancy firm in Auckland, Opus, and I was very privileged to have had that opportunity to start with them because they were the flowing out of the old Ministry of Works, and the amount of knowledge that that they inherited from there was just enormous. So I continued on, and I've been doing work in the oil and gas industry. By the way, my early career was more in the military, testing aircraft and missiles, but it transitioned into more industrial electrical situations and control systems for industry in factories and so on. So the purpose of today's presentation is to share the knowledge that I've gathered over the years. And I hope this will be useful information for you to guide your journey in New Zealand. And my aim is to help you to find gainful employment here in New Zealand. I wish I have had this guidance earlier on. I was here, I think, about 3-4 years when I had an opportunity to meet a person who sensitized me to the structure of the Act and the regulations, which I will cover later today, which was very helpful for me to understand the context of everything. I just want to say that this is how I see the industry. It may not, everyone may not agree with that. I obviously don't know everything. And the mind map, as I said earlier on, is to demonstrate the relationships as I see it. So I'll go over to the next part, and that is looking at how the electricity industry in South Africa is organized and controlled. The government basically has the main control is through the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. There's also a program going on through the Ministry of Transport, which has to do with the electrical vehicles program. And I just mentioned that for information. We'll now look at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And I'll just move the chart up a little bit so that I can expand what's happening under the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, MB. So the Electrical Workers Registration Board sits under MB, but it works quite independently of MB, and that registers electrical workers in New Zealand. I won't go in too much detail at the moment. We can come back to this. So these are their responsibilities if you want to look at that, but you can find all of this on the EWRB website. They've got a number of registration classes. and the presiding member at present is Mel Orange, and the website also covers registering people from overseas, and you'll find the following there to explain what and how you can register. Now, going back to the registration classes, you can register as an electrician or an electrical engineer. The work that an electrical engineer can do is very similar to what an electrician can do, but there are certain options where you are restricted to just certain types of work. So I suggest that you go to the EWRB website to understand how that works. But you are not allowed to do any prescribed electrical work in New Zealand unless you are registered under one of the classes on the through the Electrical Workers Registration Board. Then there's also the Chartered Professional Engineers Act, which sits under MB, and they administer that. So there's a council which oversees the act, but the registration authority, the people who's actually handling registrations under the Chartered Professional Engineers Act, is Engineering New Zealand, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But why I'm just mentioning it now is because it's sitting bridging between Engineering New Zealand and the Chartered Professional Engineers Council. Then also under the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment is Standards New Zealand, which was previously sort of a separate organization, but they are now sitting under under MB. Standards, the new website is launching today. It was supposed to go live on Monday, but they had a bit of a problem, so it's going live today. And the Standards New Zealand, they create standards for New Zealand, and they are abbreviated as NZS. Some of them are joint standards with Australia and New Zealand, and those are called AS/NZS standards. And there's a joint standards development program, and the electrical engineering group is part or takes part at the moment in two, the emergency lighting standard update and the update of AS/NZS 1020 for static electricity, which I've been nominated to take part in. There's also work on the earthing system in New Zealand. At the moment, we have a multiple earth neutral system, which is a very closely related to the international standard TNCS, which is a combined protective earth and neutral conductor from the transformer to the installation, and from there the earth, the ground conductor, the earth, and the neutral conductor is separated in the installation. But because of the development of new technologies like electrical vehicles, they're also looking at the possibility of introducing a TT system of distribution, and that's covered in a technical report that's been published in 2014, which is quite interesting to read, to get an overview of the thinking at the moment. Other work that MB is doing is what I've mentioned now. So there's a committee in MB that is considering the TNCS system versus TT systems. They've also published the EV guidelines, and they have to update the regulations. Now, previously, there was a group within the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, which was called Energy Safety. But they have been moved, and they are now part of WorkSafe New Zealand. After the disaster at the Pike River mine, the workplace safety organization has been reformed, and WorkSafe is an independent organization sitting outside any government department, and energy safety has moved in under MB, and they've got several people, but the main person for electrical is Peter Murphy, and he's got some other inspectors and advisors with them. So then I'll go and look at the legislation and the regulatory framework a little bit later. But before we go to that, I just want to mention there's an electricity authority that has been created around about 2010. It's an independent Crown entity. And if you go to their website, which is just look for EA, Electricity Authority, they've got a history of government involvement in electricity. And that gives you a little bit of understanding how the structure in New Zealand developed over the years, which will help you understand why things are fairly complicated and how these things link together, which I will show you in this part on legislation just below. The Electricity Authority determine the market rules. They develop, administer, and enforce. And they look at generation, transmission, system operation, etc. You can read it all there. And so as an electrical engineer, you won't have much to do with the Electricity Authority, but it's worth understanding why they are there and what they do. Now, if we look at the regulatory framework, there's an act which is overarching. That's the Electricity Act of 1992, and the electricity sets out the regulatory framework for the supply of electricity in the industry, and that's more the technical stuff. The restrictions on certain electrical work and who are allowed to do such electrical work, and for the regulation and control of electrical workers. So the Electrical Workers Registration Board was created on strength of this act. It also regulates fittings and electrical appliances that are or may be exported internationally. It allows for the promulgation of regulations. So the electricity safety regulations here, that's been created under strength of the Electricity Act. And unfortunately, the Act is a little bit hard to understand. And if English is your second language or third language, that's probably even more of a barrier. So it takes time to grasp all the statements because it's a bit of legalese. But please persevere and study that, because that will give you a good understanding of the structure of the Act in New Zealand. Now, the Electricity Industry Act 2010 is the one that established the Electricity Authority. And I won't go into much of that because that's not of much importance for what we want to discuss today. So the electricity safety regulations, people always ask, why is it safety in brackets? It's simple. It's because there are other regulations too. And I'll just move this up. Maybe I shall close this one on the side so that we have more space on the screen. So there's the Electricity Industry Levy of Industry Participants Regulations 2010, the Electricity Industry Enforcement Regulations, and the Low Fixed Charge Tariff Option for Domestic Consumers Regulations 2004. But we're dealing with the Electric Safety Regulations, and the latest version is 2010, but it has been revised. And so when you look on the website for electricity safety regulations, make sure the latest one, to my knowledge, is the reprint as at 20 January, and that's stated in the top, on the top of the first page. The layout, I won't bore you with all the details, but basically it's got different parts that deal with certain aspects. And this sits under the Electricity Act. Sorry, the Electricity Act is on a higher level than the regulations. Then comes the regulations, and under regulations comes standards. So the regulations overrule what's stated in standards. So if the regulation says do it in a certain way, or you have to abide by this, this has more strength than the standards itself. So there's a website where you can search for the regulations. It's the legislation website, and then the standard. Maybe it's worth just mentioning here, in the regulations, there's a schedule that says what standards are to be used, and they call it the cited standards. So the AS/NZS 3000, the wiring rules, has been replaced by a newer version 2018, but it's not cited in the regulations. The 2007 version is cited. So if you do any electrical work in New Zealand at the moment, you have to abide by the standards in published in 2007 as amended. And once the let me page up here. When going back to the government part, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has to update the regulations, and only then will they cite the new standard, and from then on the new standard will come into force. There's a debate on the readability of the standard at the moment, and it's quite complicated for some electricians and people that speaks another language. The standards that we also deal with in electricity is the hazardous area standards, the AS/NZS 6079, which is based on the IEC series of standards 60079. One of the standards to look out for is the AS/NZS 6079 part 32, which will probably be published later this year or next year, and it deals with static in hazardous areas. There are also standards and requirements for mining, which I won't cover in detail, but you would have noticed that under the Electrical Workers Registration Board, there are registration classes that are required. Let me just open that up. Registration classes like electrical inspector, option endorsed mining, and I think there's an electrician also endorsed mining. So you can't do work unless you are certified to do that type of work. So coming back down to the standards and acts, the EWRB is talking about the updating of the standards, and they've done some queries from the industry to get feedback to see how it can be made more readable and understandable and simpler to grasp how these things fit together. I don't know when that will be implemented, but it is underway. So I'll get to the SIGI recommendations a little bit later. So let me just move up to the other side of this screen. The qualifications in New Zealand can be represented by this, which is from the NZ Qualification NZQA website. And when I talk about engineers, I'm basically talking about this level 7 people with a bachelor's degree. There are also positions in the industry for people with lower level certificates. And to understand that a little bit better, it would be good to look at the different accords, the Washington, Sydney, and Dublin Accord. I'll just open those up. And there's a web page by one of the job opportunity places where you can have a look where they have a description, Franklin Smith. So visit that site and understand where you fit in with your qualifications and where you can apply for a position. So let's come to Engineering New Zealand. Engineering New Zealand is a home for people in the engineering industry. In the past, it was called IPENS, Institute for Professional Engineers New Zealand. And after the rebranding a couple of years ago, they're trying to become a home for the whole engineering profession. Chartered engineers as well as technicians and people on lower levels. You can join, or there are different registration classes: student, emerging professional member, and chartered member. And then there's chartered professional engineer, which is parallel to a chartered member, where you register on the basis that you go through an assessment under the Chartered Professional Engineers Act, and only then can you add the title CPENG behind your name. At the moment, Engineering New Zealand is looking at the structure. I don't know how it will play out in the long run, but you will, if you're a member of Engineering New Zealand, either as a student or any of the other levels, you would have received some communication about that. And I would strongly recommend for people who's not working in New Zealand yet to apply for student membership. I joined Engineering New Zealand probably about 10 years ago after I arrived here in New Zealand, and although I had 30 years experience, I was registered as a graduate engineer, which sounds a bit funny, but that doesn't matter. It gives you the opportunity to take part in the activities and get the communication, which is valuable for your development, and then you go on to higher levels once you've registered. The engineering profession is controlled, and it's biased towards the civil, structural, and geotechnical. I think it's probably because when something goes wrong in that area, it's not just hurting one or two people. It typically hurts 10 to hundreds of people. But having said that, I think it's worth to say that spell that correctly, other disciplines need to step up and play their role in Engineering New Zealand, and one way of doing that is to participate in technical groups. Having mentioned technical groups, I just want to add here that as Jana said, I'm a member of the electrical engineering group, and that's a group that's only been created fairly recently, and we're about 121 members. Don't quote me on the number. It would have changed since this was prepared a month or two ago. The membership is excluding of GST $50 per year, so it's not that expensive. I think students can become members for free. And the New Zealand Society for Safety Engineering has been created in 2014. There's 100 members around about. We also fairly affordable. And what's worth noting is that under this new Health and Safety at Work Act that was published in 2015, there's a duty on designers to look at health and safety during the design process. And the society is bringing together engineers from various disciplines, and we have a website with a forum where people can ask questions and take part in communications. So that's something that's also worth joining. And then there are many other technical groups. I think Holly said yesterday there are 31. SIGI is obviously one of those groups, and there are organizations like CSOC and the Mechanical Engineering Group and the Rivers Group, and so many others. You can go on Engineering New Zealand's website to see what's happening there, but I strongly recommend that you join these groups, and I'll mention something about that a little bit later on. Now, another organization that is of great importance to engineers in New Zealand, and especially people who's trying to find their feet after arriving here from another country, is the New Zealand Electrical Inspectors Association, the NZEIA. It was called the CREA, the Central Region Electrical Inspectors Association, and probably about 3-4 years ago now, the leadership decided to go national, and the name was changed to the New Zealand Electrical Inspectors Association, and they're going from strength to strength. There's a membership class open for electrical engineers. It is associate membership. You don't have voting rights, but you can participate in the forums, and you can attend meetings and listen to what's happening in the Electrical Inspectors Association. And I can tell you, I've learned a massive lot, and it has developed my network immensely. So their website is at nzeia.com. I'll see if I can bring that up. Here it is. So you won't see everything until you become a member. It's just a subset of information available. This is the substation at Bunnythorpe that I took a couple of years ago. So there are many interesting threads to follow on the forum there of actual things that electrical inspectors find, and then they ask questions, and other people with knowledge about the subject then respond to that and give guidance. So then there's the Electrical Engineers Association, and the Electrical Engineers Association has more to do with lines companies and distribution of electricity. The electrical engineering group, I would say, is more for building services, industrial electrical engineering, and the like. So some of you who may want to go into the Vectors and Genesis Energies of this world, PowerCo and so on, would find benefit in joining the Electrical Engineers Association. Now, there are two other organizations that you as an individual probably would not participate in, but it's just worth understanding where they fit in. And the one is the Electrical Regulatory Authorities Council. And that's an organization that that pulls together the people who make the regulations. So it's more on a governance or government level, and you'll find their website as well. There are several members in most of them in Australia, but Engineering New Zealand also forms part of that organization. What I found interesting on their website is the accidents, the reports on accidents, fatal accidents. And I just had a look this morning at this report of 2020, and there were 4 accidents last year in New Zealand, fatal accidents, and there's a rise. So that indicates that there's more work to be done in the safety of electrical installations and how we work. Most of these related to accidents with overhead lines, and it's really sad how many people still get caught out by touching somehow overhead lines with cranes, etc. Then there's the electricity equipment safety system. Now, to my knowledge, I think Peter Murphy said the other night at the Electrical Inspectors Association that there's no equipment that actually used the system, but it's just worth noting that it exists, and if you can read up about that on the EES website. And then I'll just finish off by moving over to my recommendations for engineers in SIGI trying to get employed in New Zealand. Networking is probably one of the biggest factors in becoming successful. It will help you understand the industry through talking to other people and getting their perspectives. By knowing someone in the industry, it improves your chances for an entry position. Participate in societies and clubs, even social clubs are worthwhile in understanding the culture in New Zealand, the jokes, so that you can participate as a full member of the New Zealand society. Obviously, technical groups are of interest to you and relating to your field is very useful. And don't underestimate the network that you can build in LinkedIn, and just following what's happening on LinkedIn gives you an indication of where developments are happening. And I think in New Zealand, in the next couple of years, a lot will happen in the renewable space, in wind energy, solar installations, and especially electrical vehicles. I'm presently working with a firm in Auckland on bus chargers that must be ready in April this year, I understand, for the electric bus fleet that will be deployed to become greener. Now, bridging from what you did in the country where you're from and to the new industry will require you to maybe make a drop down first before you can get employed as an engineer, and don't look down on that. Even if you are qualified as an electrician, even if you have to just start wiring houses, every bit of experience in New Zealand improves your chances to be recognized as a contributor and as a valuable person to have. Some people who do not have qualifications that are recognized by one of the 3 accords that I mentioned earlier on would do well by enrolling and getting a New Zealand qualification, because that will open doors for you as well. Now, the language is always a barrier. As you can hear from my accent, I haven't lost it. Coming through over to a new country as an adult makes it really hard, and we speak Afrikaans at home, so therefore that prevents me from losing my accent. But I think writing and coming over helps you getting accepted, because people sort of takes a while, probably about a minute or two to tune into your it's like tuning an old style radio, just tuning in on how you pronounce words, and then from then on they can follow. But when you do writing, make sure you use a spell checker, and there's a program called Grammarly. If you haven't used it before, I can strongly recommend it. It will help you with the structure of your sentences and how you come over. You can unintentionally come across as harsh, but in your home country or in your language, that would not have been frowned upon. One example, for instance, in Afrikaans, if you see a little baby, you would show empathy and excitement of how beautiful this baby is, and you could say something like, "Oh, shame! This is a beautiful baby," but it could be taken in New Zealand as shame. So I've heard from many South Africans where they've had this experience where they actually meant good, that they were taken in a negative way. So be sensitive to how the words are used in New Zealand. So I've now covered some of the speaking issues. So attend English classes if you're from a country where you haven't had exposure. Fortunately, in South Africa, we had to do Afrikaans and English in school up to year 13. Although I must say, at year 13, having grown up in an Afrikaans community, I could not really have a conversation in in English, and that made, because all of our textbooks were in English, so it was really hard for that first couple of years on university to get into it, and obviously I had to learn very quickly when I came to New Zealand. The effects of sounding different, I think, and that's my perception, is people think if you sound different from them, that you're probably not as smart. And you have to be conscious about that, and just be patient, because once you've had the opportunity to show your skills and so the other people who work around you can see what you know and what you understand and how you approach problems, then they will start to develop a respect, and then this sort of bias that they had towards people speaking with an accent from a different country will slowly weaken and eventually disappear. And lastly, I would say technical groups, learn new things. Technical groups is really valuable. YouTube, things like Veritasium, where the guy who presents it is a qualified engineer. It's not just a lot of nonsense. It's well researched documentation. And that he has stuff on various subjects, but you can learn stuff on arc faults, on many other aspects. So YouTube is like a university, but make sure that you do not fact check, and make sure that it's not the wrong stuff that you learn. And then follow discussion forums on the internet. There are several apart from the New Zealand Electrical Inspectors Association, but that, and we hope to have something like that for the electrical engineering group later in the year or next year. but that is where you can learn stuff that you haven't even thought about. So that's me. I hope this was valuable, and if you have any specific questions on the regulatory framework, please contact me. I'll try and help to steer you in the right direction. If I don't know the question, I probably know someone who will know. So, were there any questions?
Thank you, Daniel. And yes, we do have some questions. So the first question is from someone, and the question here is that, can the chartered professional engineers provide COCs, or do you have to be a member of the Electrical Workers Registration Board? In CSC, I think it's a certificate of compliance.
Yes. You must be registered with the Electrical Workers Registration Board. A chartered professional engineer cannot issue a COC, electrical safety certificate, or even do any other prescribed electrical work per se.
Okay, thank you. Question. Another question. When will New Zealand NZS 3000 2018 be ratified?
That's a question that not even WorkSafe can answer at the moment, because it falls under the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. They have to determine when they will update the regulations, and the work priorities at MB is determined on a basis that I don't understand. So the people in industry, and I know WorkSafe is really keen on getting that updated. So there's no answer that I can give, and I don't know of anyone at MB that can give that answer. That's $1 million question.
Thank you, Daniel. Then question from Leon Lima. I already have EWRB limited license electrician, and already have a level 4 in the QA. What else can I do to find a sponsorship?
I don't know what he means by finding a sponsorship, really.
Okay, maybe.
That question just reminded me of something else. When you register with the Electrical Workers Registration Board, you have access to the relevant standards for the electrical industry. So it opens up access to the AS-NZS 3000, to the AS-NZS 60079s on hazardous areas, and a lot of other standards that are useful, like for medical installations, for movable structures, for marinas, for generators, etc. So it is really worthwhile registering with the Electrical Workers Registration Board. And the person who says he wants a sponsorship, I don't know whether he means how can he get a position at a job. In that sense, if that's what he means, is I think what's important is to work through a network and to befriend other people that has a standing or has jobs have jobs in the industry, and if the person sees that that you're a person knowledgeable with skills, they will probably be able to open doors for you if you can't get in otherwise. But I think one of the big things that let people down is the language barriers, and one has to work on that too, so that you come across as someone that will be able to understand the instructions, and that you will be able to communicate what your problems are and what you see and what you need.
Thank you, Daniel. A few more questions here. Jeff asking, where does REA sits in the framework?
REA.
REA, yes.
I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Registered electrical engineer.
Maybe it's REA association,
Okay.
maybe.
We can leave it up there, and they can maybe add a comment on it to let us know what that means.
Yep, cool. And the next question is, could I be a member of EWRB since I'm a student, year 2 of electrical with honors?
No, you have to apply under certain conditions. Go to the EWRB website. You have to write an exam. You have to pay a fee, and there you have to be. If you're coming in as a student, you have to register with someone that's prepared to take you on as an apprentice. And the biggest barrier there is stuff that doesn't relate to your technical knowledge. It's how you come over as a team member.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Question from Pedro. Can you register with the board as an electrical engineer, even though your electrical qualification is not on the accords?
The qualification as an engineer has to be recognized by Engineering New Zealand, because there's an agreement between Engineering New Zealand and the Electrical Workers Registration Board. So I would say on that basis, if it's not one of the accord recognized degrees, you won't be able to.
Thank you. Question from Snobin. How you compare New Zealand wiring regulations with UK regulation BS 7671?
I don't know that standard too well, so I would rather not comment, but I think it's not very different. There is even talk that in future New Zealand may adopt such an international standard rather than reinventing the wheel, because the technology developed so quickly at the moment that we cannot keep up. And I think in Europe especially, they're more responsive to the changing technologies, and many of the things that are emerging technologies at the moment are incorporated into their standards much quicker than they are in our model here on the southern end of the southern hemisphere.
Okay, thank you. Question from Stephen. What would be the New Zealand standard that is equivalent to the SANS 10,400?
I don't know that standard. But the ASNZS 3000 deals with electrical wiring installations, in other words. It does not cover appliances and things like that.
Okay. Question from someone. How difficult is it to get into the New Zealand industry if someone's age is 35 years above, with no New Zealand experience, would it facilitate entry to apply for graduate engineering position even though you have experience more than 5 years overseas?
Yeah, I don't think there's any limitation on how many years you have to go in as a student member. As I said, I was probably about 55, 52, 54, 55 in that area when I was a graduate member of Engineering New Zealand. It feels a bit silly, but so be it. It's just your road to somewhere.
Thank you, Daniel. And a few more questions here. How to member in Engineering New Zealand or the board for Sydney Accord with level 7? Which one the better for my overseas design experience?
Sorry, I just read that question again. I'm not sure what the gist of it is.
I think the person is wondering which membership is better for his or her overseas design experience, Engineering New Zealand or Electrical Workers Registration Boards. And the person got, I think, Sydney Accord degree level 7. Which one is better?
I would say go for both because there are certain aspects, but the registration with Engineering New Zealand nor becoming a chartered professional engineer give you any advantage in doing certain types of work. Being an electrical engineer with the Electrical Workers Registration Board guarantees that you can do prescribed electrical work within the limits of your license, whether it's option 1 or option 2, and it also gives you certain things that you can do that an unregistered person cannot do. So that's probably the more valuable one, and I think that's one of the main drives why we've got the electrical engineering group, because I personally feel that that being registered with Engineering New Zealand should be powerful so that it gives you the right to do certain work. Now, we don't have too much time, but the whole thing with the consultation between MB Engineering New Zealand about CPENG and the chartered membership of Engineering New Zealand and the proposed changes in the structure. They want to register people doing structural engineering, geotechnical, fire engineering, and other life safety critical things on a similar model that we actually already have for the electrical business. So you will register with MB, with the government, rather than with an organization. So how that will play out, we don't know yet. But for electrical engineers, I would say it's more valuable to be registered with the Electrical Workers Registration Board, but it's for your future career and the development of your career. It is definitely worthwhile registering with Engineering New Zealand and to become a chartered professional engineer.
Thank you, Daniel. And last 2 questions here is that how is solar energy and electric vehicle market for electrical engineers in New Zealand?
At the moment, I think most of that work has been done by electricians, and that's one of the ironies for me in the structure in New Zealand at the moment, because everything that an electrical engineer can do can be done by an electrician, although they do not go through the same thinking process, the design of new stuff processes. And I think that's something that should be addressed in the long run. I don't say that there are some electricians that are really smart and do good designs, but I've seen the opposite as well. That needs to be addressed in the long run, and therefore, and that's why Electrical Engineering Group is the voice for the electrical engineers in Engineering New Zealand, and they will be consulted when there's any dealings by Engineering New Zealand with other groups like MB and the Electrical Workers Registration Board under MB.
Thank you, Daniel. And last question, and then we will start wrapping up because of the time, is that I would like to go back to the question that we had before. Where does a registered engineering associate sits in the framework? That was a question before, and I got clarification about what REE mean.
I don't know.
Okay, that's good. And that's pretty much it. So I think we covered all our questions. Daniel, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to say I was once an immigrant engineer. Good luck with your journey. Sometimes it's hard, but that door, the right door, will open for you one day, but you have to work tirelessly to get to that position. And I think networking is probably one of the most important things.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. And thanks again for joining us today. And we will see you next time in other webinars that we organize in the future. Thank you, everyone.
All of the best.
All the best. Bye.